All right, right back into it. Second video here for chapter 5. There is this video is really going to be about Japan's internal stress. This is in the first video I talked about there being external forces acting upon you. Maybe I said cousins, whatever, family members, friends. This is that internal voice that's saying, well, wait a minute. This is that moment where I'm really sorry if this wrecks someone's world. I hope that is not the case. But I remember my wife and I, we decided very early on we weren't going to say anything about Santa to our kids because we didn't want them at some point in time to find out that Santa was maybe not entirely true, and so on and so forth. And so we made an early decision to not say anything because we didn't want our kids to think that we were liars. And this is kind of where Japan is. This is that situation where, again, when we made that decision, my wife and I talked it out, and we said we didn't want some point in our kids' life where they turned around to us and said, if you're lying about that, what else are you lying about? So for Japan, this is that moment of truth where their people are like, wait a minute, if the outside world is really strong and we're really weak, and you would always say we were really strong and their outside world was weak and we could subdue our barbarians, my backside. So this is where Japan lands. They have two different groups. One group that still is trying to stand up for the Bakufu. Another group that looks at the situation and says, I feel like we've been being lied to. So, and those are the two groups that are coming along. And there are two guys who are really kind of the leaders of each of the sides. Anyways, so it all begins with a whole bunch of people. There's a movie that came out in the 90s called The Perfect Storm, which I really enjoyed. It was about a boat crew and them meeting up with three separate storms that kind of converge on them all at once, and they end up sinking to the bottom of the Atlantic. These guys actually really meet the Bakufu, the Shogun meet a perfect storm. So with there was unseasonably bad weather for Japan, and so people were starving, like straight up starving to death at times. And so when people start to starve and they're like, wait a minute, I've been paying my taxes and rights. Where's all the rights I've been paying you in taxes? Where's that going? And why are we not prosperous? And what's going on? And people are the commoners are beginning to have like personal unrest. That's that civil unrest begins to happen. And some of the samurai that were not directly tied to the Bakufu, remember in the beginning I talked about there being like levels of how much we love how much the Bakufu loves us and how much we love them. There's this drive of these samurai that were not as loyal to the shogun and maybe had a bit more influence from the outside world and maybe knew a bit more than everyone else about the outside world. Those samurai begin to speak up and begin to be vocal about them not really wanting to follow after the way of the shogun, because they see that the shogun is maybe not as knowledgeable or as accurate about their power. So this begins basically a civil war. And actually, I love this picture. So this one here, these are samurai wives fighting against the government troops. So these women fighting against the shogun to get him out of power. That's kind of crazy inside of a worldview that was as man-dominated as Japan's was, to have women even standing up. So in 1867, a samurai from Tosa convinced the shogun to resign and take a role in the new government. Before that could happen, the military forces from Satsuma and Choshu intervened. They proclaimed Meiji as the emperor. And so Emperor Meiji was that figurehead person that had been kind of happening in the background. But they came in and said, no, to heck with that noise. get the whole Tokugawa Ieyasu, his lineage out, and let's get Meiji, the emperor's family, back in. And for the Japanese, there's a very strong sense of like national unity around the. And again, this is very weird for us to think about from a Christian perspective, but the divinity of the emperor, that the divinity, like he was divinely put in place. So all that stuff happens inside of about 10 years, where all these different stresses and strifes are happening, and the Tokugawa shogunate is ousted in a very short amount of time, realistically. And it's amazing. This still is a record. They had been at peace as a country for 250 years. Now, the question that I'm going to kind of pose to you guys is that peace worth a lot? Is that peace that they experience worth a high amount to you guys? Does the peace that you feel from not having to deal with some of the stresses that are in other schools? I know I've had students come in and tell me, Mr. S, these things that I had at the other school that I was at were terrible, and everything is so much easier here because I don't have to deal with, drugs and alcohol and those pressures and some of the swearing that's going on in the hallway. And I know Liam he's off at the high school now, and he's experienced some of those same stresses, and he's like, is this worth it? Why does this have to happen? I miss the Christian school and the fact that I got to go there and focus on my learning primarily, and then have some of the fun stuff. And it was just fun, not like crazy stuff like what he's seeing sometimes in the hallway. So there's that whole thing. Now, coming out of that Edo period and into the Meiji period, there is a shift, and this isn't a massive dramatic change, but they changed the way that they run their government, where before it was the shogun that was in control, and he had his samurai, and there were the leaders of the various different daimyo lords, the different domains in Japan. They changed stuff, but there's questions about how they should change that any and every country that is making these kinds of changes will have to make decisions around. I'm not that worried about his clothes and stuff like that. So this right here is the beginning of it, though. And what they do is they make an agreement amongst the various different samurai. And so the charter oath, if, however, the older order of things be changed and the administrative authority be restored to the imperial court, yada, 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 then the empire will be able to maintain its rank and dignity among nations of the earth. So they're trying to figure out a way to go from out of the world to into the world without having a whole bunch of stress and strife around who rules and who runs a country and what the end goal is. And this part right here, I believe it is my highest duty to realize this ideal by giving up entirely my rule over this land. So this is the shogun basically saying it's of utmost importance that I give up my role as leader to Emperor Meiji so that he can be in control and be the one that actually runs a country in a different way to take us into this new world in a good way. And so the charter oath basically, so these 5 things here are really important. 1, they're going to have deliberative assemblies, which basically means they're going to acknowledge that this wasn't a coup, which is a stealing of power, but instead it's a redirect. It's a realignment. And the important thing here is those that were still on the shogun side, they weren't going to be just, out on their ear. They were still going to be a part of running the country. All classes, high and low, shall unite in vigorously carrying out the administration of the state. So this is getting rid of the class structure. This part here is really important because that means that not just the samurai are going to be involved, but also the people that were in the lower classes are going to be involved. And there was no more etta and those things. So Next one, the common people with less civil or military officials shall be allowed to pursue their own calling. So no more is like Manjiro, where his dad was a fisherman, so he had to be a fisherman. You are given the freedom that if you are intelligent and useful, then Japan needs you and it can use your abilities to make itself better and stronger. Evil customs of the past shall be ended. So this is basically tied to number 3. And this part right here, this is so important. The Japanese officials recognize that they need outside help. And so they basically make an acknowledgement that they're going to actually go out into the world instead of just being drawn back and being like, I don't see the rest of the world. They're actually going to consciously go out into the world and find the best of everything and bring it back to Japan so that Japan can be prosperous. Okay. I'm going to skip all of that. Those were all advancements that happened around the same time. So the new leadership came in. They had 2 key goals. I'm going through this a bit fast right now, I know, but they wanted to modernize Japan and make the economy grow. Critical importance. This is what we all, I'm sure, are hoping that coming out of our stress and strife with COVID, that the Canadian government will be like, yeah, we want our economy to get back up to where it should be. Let's figure out ways to make our economy strong again. And once they were strong enough, this is important for Japan too, they wanted to get rid of the unequal treaties. That's the second goal. So catch Japan up, make its economy strong, and then once Japan's economy is strong enough, they wanted to get rid of the unequal treaties. So this is basically, I always talk about this. Back in the day, there was a cartoon comic strip that used to be on the back of comics, and it had this little nerdy guy who had a really pretty girlfriend. Actually, here, I'll pause it and I'll find it. All right, I'm back. This is what I was talking about. This is Charles Atlas. He was a bodybuilder guy, and basically, Japan was kind of in this situation up here where it was weak and couldn't defend itself, and this guy came in and bullied them, and Japan knew that if they wanted to get, in this case, he wanted to get his girl back. She's like, oh, don't let it bother you, little boy. And she like walks away and ditches him. And Japan realizes the only way that they're going to be able to get the girl back is by being able to defend itself. So that's what Japan makes up its mind it's going to do. It's going to go in and get itself into a position of power and authority where it can defeat anyone that might want to push. So this is actually like the smartest thing. And this is one of those things that I kind of wish Canada would do. I wish Canada, as oil is beginning to be less and less popular, I wish Canada would go out and look and see what is out there in the world. What can it do to make itself dominant in the rest of the world? And things like, if oil isn't going to be the next thing, what is the next thing, and how do we invest in that, invest our time and energy in that so that we can make the most. So Japan actually goes on what's called the Iwakura mission. And this is a really important thing for Japan. They went out, and there's the list of things that they're looking for. They went out and found education systems, government systems, military systems, all those different things to find what the best way of doing things was, how to remodel Japan. And literally, as they went, I think there's a picture here of the trip they went on. They left Japan, went to San Francisco, Washington, went to Great Britain, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Russia, blah, 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 all the way down to this list of countries. And they came back and they said, this is the best of what the best countries are doing and how they're doing it. So let's not just model ourselves after one country, let's model the best military. So the best navy is by this country, and let's get their navy. Let's make our navy like theirs. This country has the best education system, so let's make our education system like their education system. This country has the best of this, and this country has the best of this. So chapter 6, all of chapter 6 summed up is Japan going from being, head buried in the sand out of the rest of the world to being a country that is, today one of the dominant forces in the world. How did Japan go about doing that? Well, this is a big part of it. The guys that went out on the Iwakura mission, they were literally going out looking for what other countries had and how to bring it in and how to set it up in Japan. So that was the whole role. They were trying to get Japan out of the old ways and into the new world in a way that still maintained Japan's dignity and authority and power and, independence, because those are critical for Japan, but also put it in a position where it would be able to become a powerhouse on its own. And they were very successful. And if I'm going to talk about the essay just one last time, if you think about being in the Christian school and being isolated, if you have done your very best here in your time in the Christian school over these last, 7 or 8 or 9 years, depending if you're here for kindergarten, those kinds of things, if you are doing your very best here, pushing yourself to achieve your very highest, I think that truthfully, when you don't have to deal with, when I taught at Montrose, my first, I can remember having kids run into my classroom being like, "Mr. S, there's a fight outside," and me like running to my door and heading outside. And by the time I got there, someone else had already broken up the fight, but there was 50 grade 7 kids surrounding this fight between these 2 grade 7 boys. And I can remember a girl multiple times showing up drunk to school. She was busted on the bus once, and she had actually got to school another time. And I can remember, when I was in school, when I was in grade 9, there was a girl in grade 8 who got pregnant. And there's all the stress and strife of all those different kinds of things pushing and pulling at her and at him and at those people. And, it was really hard as a teacher to go and get my information across. I don't deal with that here as a teacher. And, having sons that are in the school, they don't deal with that on the same level that some other kids do in other schools. And so I think that when we're talking about isolationism, if you want to look at it really negatively, you can, but there are definitely some perks that come with it. And if you're deliberate, kind of like Japan was, you can actually jump out of isolation and into the rest of the world, and in areas that are actually important. If you are very focused on finding those areas that are important, you can jump into the rest of the world and, be able to enter the world and not just kind of be behind or meekly follow along, but you can actually be strong and dominant and be successful. So I'm going to end chapter 5 there. I will see you guys next week with chapter 6.